2:10 in the morning. The B-1B Lancer moved through the cold air at 30,000 feet above the Persian Gulf. This was not a standard patrol. The heavy bomber, call sign Reaper 11, was carrying a prototype electronic warfare suite known as Project Gorgon. The mission was a live environment stress test. The goal was to fly along the edge of Iranian sovereign airspace and remain completely invisible to their most advanced radar systems. But as Major Elias Thorne looked at his primary flight display, a single amber light began to pulse. If the Gorgon system was functioning as promised, the Iranian air defense net should have seen nothing but empty sky. Instead, someone was looking back. The night air was thin and stable. Below the aircraft, the Strait of Hormuz appeared as a black void punctuated by the distant, flickering lights of oil tankers. Inside the cockpit, the atmosphere was clinical and tense. The only sound was the low hum of the 4 General Electric engines and the rhythmic breathing of the crew through their oxygen masks. Thorne glanced at his weapons systems officer. "Check the Gorgon status. Are we leaking a son-turns-as-a-pegtated signal?" Captain Sarah Jenkins tapped a sequence into her terminal. Her eyes moved quickly across the scrolling lines of green code. "Systems are nominal. We are in full passive mode. According to the internal diagnostic, we do not exist on radar." "Then explain that amber light," Thorne said. His voice was flat and professional. "That is a long-range search pulse. It is hitting us from the coast." Jenkins checked her sensors again. "I see it. It is coming from a site near Bandar Abbas, but it is not a standard sweep. The frequency is shifting. It is like they are hunting for a specific resonance." 20 miles to the north, the Iranian coast sat like a jagged wall of rock and shadow. Somewhere in that darkness, a sophisticated Russian-made air defense system was waking up. The crew of the B-1B had been told that Project Gorgon would make them a ghost. Now, they felt like a target painted in bright neon. 2:12 in the morning. The radio crackled with a burst of static. Then, a voice spoke in clear, accented English. "Unidentified military aircraft at altitude 30,000. You are approaching the sovereign air buffer of the Islamic Republic of Iran. You are designated as a hostile intruder. Alter your course immediately to 270, or you will be engaged." Thorne keyed his mic. "Bandar Abbas Control. This is an American aircraft operating in international airspace. We are maintaining a legal flight path 22 miles off your coast. We are not a threat." There was a long pause. The silence on the radio felt heavy. "Reaper 11," the voice returned. "We do not see an American aircraft. We see a digital signature that does not belong in this sky. You have 60 seconds to turn away. This is your only warning." Thorne looked at Jenkins. "They do not see the plane. They see the Gorgon system. It is not masking us. It is making us look like something else." "Sir," Jenkins said. Her voice rose an octave. "The search radar just dropped. I have multiple high-intensity tracks. They are moving from search to fire control. They are locking on." The amber light on the dash turned a solid, angry red. A low-frequency tone began to throb in their headsets. It was the sound of a missile battery slaving its guidance computers to their position. 500 miles away, inside the Combat Information Center in Qatar, senior officers watched the digital map. They saw the B-1B as a blue icon. They saw the Iranian radar site as a red circle. Between them, a thin red line appeared. It was a vector, a path of intent. The mission was supposed to be a quiet test of a new era in stealth. Now, it was turning into a potential international flashpoint. The Americans had a $100 million bomber and 4 lives on the line. The Iranians had a hair trigger on their most advanced battery and a target they could not identify. 30 seconds, the Iranian controller said. "Turn now." Thorne gripped the throttles. He could feel the vibration of the massive aircraft through his gloves. He had orders to stay on. the track. He had a mission to complete, but the computer was telling him that a missile was already being prepared for launch. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 2:16 in the morning. Inside the Bandar Abbas air defense sector, the radar operators stared at their screens. The digital displays were not showing a clean, identifiable icon. Instead, they showed a flickering mass of data that defied standard classification. To the Iranian crew, it did not look like an airplane. It looked like a hole in the sky that was moving at 600 knots. Captain Rezai stood behind the lead console. He was a veteran of the SADF air defense sector. He had monitored hundreds of American flights over the years. He knew the patterns of the drones and the tankers. But this was different. The contact was pulsing. 1 second, the radar return was the size of a small bird. The next, it was as large as an aircraft carrier. Rezai leaned over the operator's shoulder. Identify the signature. The operator shook his head. I cannot, Captain. The cross-section is unstable. The frequency hopping is extremely high. It is as if the air itself is vibrating. Check the transponder again, Rezai ordered. There is no signal. No civilian identification. No military squawk. The target is flying dark. The target is flying dark. 2:17 in the morning. The command center was a hive of controlled urgency. The walls were lined with large monitors, showing the geography of the Strait of Hormuz. The red icon representing the intruder was now 21 miles from the coast. It was skating along the very edge of the Iranian buffer zone. In the world of air defense, this was a kinetic handshake. It was a test of will. Rezai picked up the secure line to the regional command center. This is SADF sector. We have a Tier 1 intrusion. The target is utilizing advanced electronic masking. We are unable to establish a positive ID, but the flight profile is consistent with a heavy bomber. I am requesting authorization to transition to a hot standby. The response from his superior was immediate. Authorization granted. Bring the Syed battery to full readiness. Do not fire unless the buffer is breached, but slave your fire control to the target. 2:18 in the morning, inside the cockpit of the B-1B Lancer. The situation was deteriorating inside the American jet. Captain Jenkins was fighting a cascade of system warnings on her console. The Project Gorgon suite was designed to be a scalpel, but it was behaving like a sledgehammer. Sir, Jenkins said. Her voice was strained. The Gorgon system is bleeding into our internal bus. It has knocked out our own transponder. We are no longer broadcasting a friendly ID. Major Thorne looked at the primary flight display. Can we reset the IFF? I am trying. But the Gorgon processor has priority over the avionics. It thinks the transponder signal is an external threat, and it is actively suppressing it. To the Iranians, we are a total ghost. Thorne gripped the control stick. If we turn now, we are giving them a clear look at our side profile. The radar return will spike. They might think we are maneuvering for a missile launch. If we stay on this track, Jenkins replied, they are going to run out of patience. My sensors show the battery at Bandar Abbas has shifted to a high PRF track. That is a firing solution, Major. The crew was trapped in a digital paradox. To stay on course was to invite an intercept. To turn away was to look like an aggressor. The experimental technology that was supposed to make them safe had instead stripped away their identity. On the ground, Captain Rezai watched the red icon. It was no longer flickering. The Iranian fire control radar had locked onto the center of the Gorgon interference. The system had found a solid point to aim at. Rezai looked at the master engagement switch. Target is locked. Distance is 18 miles. The silence in the bunker was broken only by the hum of the cooling fans. Everyone was waiting for the intruder to make a mistake. 2:19 in the morning. The Bandar Abbas Sector Command. Captain Rezai held the black handset to his ear. The voice on the other end was cold. It was the regional commander at the southern headquarters. The order was clear. The intruder had entered the final defensive buffer. You are cleared for a localized intercept, the commander said. If the target crosses the 18-mile line, you will engage. We cannot allow an unidentified electronic warfare platform to loiter off our coast. Rezai looked at the screen. The red icon was at 18.5 miles. It was moving slow and deliberate. Understood, Rezai replied. Battery is slaved. Sayed 3 missiles are in hot standby. Target is illuminated. He hung up the phone. His hand stayed on the console. He did not want a war, but he was a soldier. He looked at the junior officer. At the fire control station. Final warning. Send it now. 2:20 in the morning. Inside the cockpit of Reaper 1-1. The sound was no longer a pulse. It was a continuous, high-pitched scream. The radar warning receiver was overwhelmed. The display was a PASA, jagged mess of strobe lines. Major Thorne felt the sweat under his flight suit. Jenkins, talk to me. Is the Gorgon system helping or hurting? Captain Jenkins was typing frantically. Major, it is creating a feedback loop. The system is trying to cancel out their radar, but it is amplifying our return instead. We are glowing like a supernova on their scopes. They do not see a B-1B. They see a massive, threatening energy source. Can we shut it down? Thorne asked. If I kill the power, we go completely dark, Jenkins said. But the system is currently integrated with our flight controls. If I hard reset now, we might lose the fly-by-wire. For 30 seconds, we would be a falling rock. Thorne looked out the canopy. The moon was a sliver over the dark water. Somewhere out there, a supersonic spear was being aimed at his chest. Hold the line, Thorne said. We have to finish the data collection. 5 more minutes. 2:21 in the morning. The Iranian coast. The Sayad 3 missile battery sat on a reinforced concrete pad. The twin canisters were angled toward the sea. Inside the electronics bay of the lead missile, a solid-state seeker head was cooling to side, operational temperature. It was looking for a specific signature. In the bunker, the operator's voice was steady. Target is at 18 miles. Buffer breached. Rezai felt the weight of the moment. He looked at the countdown timer. The Americans had not turned. They were defying the warning. Launch, Rezai said. He did not hesitate this time. He pressed the recessed button. In the darkness of the coast, a massive gout of orange flame erupted. The ground shook. The Sayad 3 missile cleared the canister in less than a second. It accelerated instantly. It was a white-hot streak against the black sky. It was moving at 4 times the speed of sound. Back in the B-1B, the scream in the headsets changed. It became a rapid, stuttering chirrup. Missile launch, Jenkins shouted. Vampire. Vampire. South. 17 miles and closing. Thorne slammed the throttles forward. The 4 engines roared to life. The massive bomber groaned as he pulled it into a steep, banking turn. Deploying chaff, Jenkins said. Gorgon is going to maximum power. It is trying to jam the seeker. The battle was no longer between pilots, it was between algorithms, and the missile was winning. 2:22 in the morning. The Iranian coast. The Sayad 3 missile cleared the launch rail in a bloom of white-hot fire. It moved with a violent, mechanical purpose. Within 3 seconds, it had shattered the sound barrier. Within 6 seconds, it was traveling at Mach 4. The solid-fuel rocket motor pushed the interceptor into a steep, arching climb. It was searching for the center of the electronic storm created by the B-1B. In the Bandar Abbas bunker, the fire control operator shouted over the noise of the cooling systems. Missile is away. Guidance link is solid. The seeker has a high-confidence lock. Captain Rezai watched the data stream. The missile was not just following a radar reflection. It was homing in on the specific pulse of the Gorgon system. The American technology was acting like a digital lighthouse in a pitch-black room. Time to intercept is 45 seconds, the operator said. The target is maneuvering. It is pulling 6 Gs. It does not matter. The Sayad 3 has him. 2:22 in the morning and 15 seconds. Inside the cockpit of Reaper 1-1. Major Thorne slammed the control stick to the left. The massive bomber groaned as the airframe protested the violent turn. At 30,000 feet, the air was thin, and the wings fought for grip. The B-1B was a fast aircraft, but it was not a fighter jet. It was a heavy weight trying to dance in a hurricane. "Chaff is away," Captain Jenkins reported. Her hands were a blur on the console. "The missile is ignoring the decoys. It is ignoring the towed array. Major, it is locked onto the Gorgon processor itself. Shut it down," Thorne commanded. "Cut the power to Gorgon now." "I cannot," Jenkins replied. Her voice was sharp with urgency. "The system has entered an emergency defense cycle. It has locked me out of the power grid. It is drawing maximum current from the engines. It is trying to fight the missile on its own." The cockpit was filled with a strobing red light. The threat display showed the missile as a blinking triangle. It was closing the gap at nearly 3,000 miles per hour. The distance was dropping by a mile every heartbeat. 2:22 in the morning and 30 seconds. The B-1B was now in a steep dive, trying to use the thicker air at lower altitudes to outmaneuver the interceptor. Thorne could feel the blood rushing to his head. The vibration in the airframe was terrifying. 15 miles, Jenkins called out. 12 miles. The missile is lead calculating our turn. It is going to hit us on the left side. On the ground in Bandar Abbas, the mood was one of grim satisfaction. The telemetry showed a perfect intercept curve. The red line of the missile and the blue icon of the bomber were seconds away from merging into a single point. "Impact in 10 seconds, the operator said. 9. 8. Rezai held his breath. He looked at the secondary monitor. Something was wrong. The energy readings from the target were spiking to impossible levels. The Gorgon system was no longer just broadcasting noise, it was emitting a focused, coherent beam of energy directly at the approaching missile. 7 seconds, the operator continued. The missile is accelerating. It has exceeded its maximum rated speed. Inside the cockpit of the Lancer, the crew braced for the end. Thorne leveled the wings. There was nowhere left to run. He looked out the side window. He expected to see a flash of light. "Wait," Jenkins said. Her voice was a whisper. "The lock. It just broke." "What do you mean it broke?" Thorne asked. "The tone. It stopped. The missile is still there, but it is not looking at us anymore." 2:22 in the morning and 45 seconds. The HIJACK missile was less than 2 miles from the B-1B. It should have detonated its proximity warhead. It should have turned the heavy bomber into a cloud of aluminum and titanium. Instead, the missile performed a maneuver that violated every law of aerial physics. It snapped its control fins to the maximum limit. It pulled a turn that would have disintegrated a manned aircraft. The missile did not explode. It did not miss. It simply changed its mind. The white-hot streak of the rocket motor passed 500 feet below the bomber's belly. It was moving so fast, the shockwave rattled the teeth of the American crew. "It passed us," Thorne said. He was panting. "Where is it going?" Jenkins looked at her screen. Her face went pale in the glow of the monitors. "Major, the missile has reversed course. It is tracking back the way it came. It is heading straight for the Iranian coast." 2:23 in the morning, the Persian Gulf. The cockpit of the B-1B Lancer was a chaotic symphony of warning lights and mechanical groans. Major Thorne fought to level the aircraft. The wake turbulence from the near miss had rolled the heavy bomber nearly 60 degrees. The airframe shuddered as the massive wings bit into the air again. "Jenkins!" "Status!" Thorne shouted. Captain Jenkins was leaning into her radar shroud. Her fingers were flying across the keyboard. "Major, 2020. The missile has cleared our perimeter. It is accelerating. Current speed is Mach 4.2. It is on a direct reciprocal heading to its launch point." "Did we jam it?" Thorne asked. "No," Jenkins replied. Her voice was trembling. "We did something worse. The Gorgon system did not just jam the seeker head. It hijacked the guidance logic. It is projecting a phantom image of our aircraft directly onto the Iranian radar site." Thorne looked at his primary display. The Project Gorgon interface was glowing with a deep, pulsing violet light. It was no longer responding to any commands. The system was drawing so much power that the cockpit lights were flickering in time with the pulses. "It is a feedback loop," Jenkins said. The Gorgon system is slaving the missile's own telemetry against itself. We are not just a ghost anymore. We are a mirror. 2:23 in the morning and 15 seconds. The Bandar Abbas air defense sector. The atmosphere in the Iranian bunker had shifted from professional focus to pure panic. The main tactical display showed a terrifying sight. The Syed-3 missile, their own weapon, had made a 180-degree turn. It was now 3 miles off the coast and closing fast. Captain Rezai stood frozen. He watched the digital clock. The missile would reach the coastline in less than 5 seconds. Self-destruct, Rezai commanded. Send the kill code now. The operator slammed his fist into the emergency override. Code sent. No response. The missile is ignoring the command link. Send it again, Rezai roared. The uplink is jammed, Captain. Something is saturating the entire frequency band. We have lost control of the battery. We have lost control of the missile. The junior officer at the tracking station looked up. His face was pale. Captain, the missile is not just returning. It has achieved a hard lock on our own fire control radar. It is homing in on us. 2:23 in the morning and 30 seconds. The Iranian battery was part of a larger complex that included living quarters and a secondary command post. There were 60 personnel on site. If the missile impacted, the warhead would detonate with enough force to level every structure within 200 meters. Rezai grabbed the public address microphone. All personnel, evacuate. Emergency. Evacuate the bunker now. But there was no time. A Syed-3 missile traveling at Mach 4 covers nearly 1.5 kilometers every second. The sound of its approach reached the coast before the people could even move toward the exits. It was a high-pitched, metallic shriek that seemed to vibrate through the very concrete of the bunker walls. 2:23 in the morning and 35 seconds. Inside the B-1B. The bomber was now 10 miles away from the initial engagement point. Thorn had the nose pointed toward the open sea, pushing the engines to their absolute limit. Jenkins, can you kill the signal? Thorn asked. If that missile hits their coast, this is an act of war. We have to break the link. I am trying to pull the physical breakers, Jenkins said. She was reaching behind her seat, struggling with a heavy metal panel. The system has fused the connectors. It is drawing an arc of electricity. I cannot get near it without being electrocuted. On the radar screen, the two icons were about to merge. The red triangle of the missile and the red square of the Iranian base. 5 seconds, Jenkins said. The crew of the Lancer sat in silence. They were witnesses to a disaster they had unintentionally created. They had come to test a shield. They had ended up swinging a sword they could not control. 3, 2, 1. The morning sky behind the B-1B erupted in a flash of brilliant white light. Even from 15 miles away, the glow reflected off the clouds, turning the night into a momentary, artificial day. The missile was no longer an interceptor. It was a boomerang. 2:23 in the morning and 40 seconds. Inside the Bandar Abbas bunker, the world was a cacophony of sirens. The primary fire control console was no longer showing data. It was a solid block of white noise. The cooling fans were failing. The air in the room was thick with the smell of scorched plastic and ozone. Captain Rezai stood in the center of the room. He did not look at the screens anymore. He looked at the heavy steel door of the bunker. He could feel the vibration in the soles of his boots. It was a low, rhythmic thrumming that grew louder with every heartbeat. He keyed the sector-wide radio. All units. This is Bandar Abbas. We are the target. I repeat. We are the target. Take cover. 2:23 in the morning and 50 seconds. 10 miles away, the B-1B Lancer was screaming through the night. Major Thorn gripped the control stick so hard, his knuckles were white. The cockpit was illuminated by a terrifying violet glow. The Project Gorgon processor was vibrating in its housing. It was drawing so much power that the primary flight displays were flickering. Captain Jenkins shouted over the roar of the engines. Major, the system is peaking. It is not just a jammer anymore. It is acting like a gravitational well for that missile. It is pulling the Syed-3 in with a direct energy link. Can you break it? Thorn yelled back. Negative. The logic is locked. The missile and the Gorgon system are in a closed loop. They are talking to each other at 1,000,000 bits per second. The threat display showed the missile icon and the radar sight icon merge. They were one single blinking dot. 2:24 in the morning. The Sayad-3 missile reached the final 10 meters of its flight path. It was a supersonic needle of steel and high explosives. It was aimed directly at the heart of the radar array. The proximity fuse was active. The warhead was primed. The logic of the intercept was absolute. Inside the bunker, Rezai closed his eyes. The sound was now a physical force. It was a roar that seemed to tear at the very molecules of the air. The lights in the bunker shattered. The emergency power died. In the cockpit of the Lancer, Jenkins saw a massive surge on her sensors. Now. It is happening now. The Gorgon system released a final, massive pulse of electromagnetic energy. It was a burst so powerful that it tripped every circuit breaker in the back of the aircraft. For a fraction of a second, the B-1B went completely dark. The violet glow vanished. The hum stopped. The missile was less than 3 meters from the radar dish. Its seeker head was saturated with the phantom image of the American bomber. It was prepared to detonate and destroy its own creators. 2:24 in the morning and 1 second. The world did not end. The Sayad-3 missile was 3 meters from the primary radar array at Bandar Abbas. It was a spear of fire moving at 3,000 miles per hour. The kinetic energy alone should have vaporized the structure, but the missile did not hit. At the final microsecond, the control fins on the interceptor snapped into a vertical configuration. The missile performed a maneuver that should have snapped its airframe in half. It pitched up with a force of 50 Gs. It cleared the edge of the radar dish by less than 2 feet. The heat of its passage melted the plastic casing on the exterior sensors, but the metal remained intact. The missile did not fall. It did not tumble. It climbed. It moved straight up into the black sky, its rocket motor a receding needle of white light. Inside the bunker, Captain Rezai opened his eyes. He was pressed against the cold concrete floor. He waited for the explosion. He waited for the ceiling to collapse. There was only silence. He stood up slowly. His legs were shaking. The bunker was dark, lit only by the red glow of the emergency battery lamps. He looked at his men. They were shadows in the dim light, frozen in positions of terror. "Status," Rezai whispered. His voice was a rasp. The fire control operator crawled back into his chair. He looked at the backup monitor. "The missile is gone, Captain. It passed us. It is currently at 50,000 feet. It is still climbing. Velocity is increasing." "Where is the American?" Rezai asked. I do not know. The signal is gone. The sky is empty. 2:24 in the morning and 10 seconds. Inside the cockpit of Reaper 11, Major Thorne was staring at a dead instrument panel. The B-1B was a 160-ton glider. The engines were still running, but the digital brains of the aircraft were cold. "Jenkins, report," Thorne said. "Total system failure," Jenkins replied. Her voice was hollow. The Gorgon pulse tripped every breaker in the aircraft. "I am on manual backup. I have no radar. I have no radio. I have nothing but a magnetic compass and an airspeed indicator." "Did we hit them?" Thorne asked. He looked back toward the Iranian coast. He expected to see a mushroom cloud of fire and debris. "I do not think so," Jenkins said. She was looking at a small, handheld thermal tablet. "I have a heat signature. It is moving straight up. It is the missile. It missed the coast. It is at 60,000 feet. Major, it is still accelerating." Thorne looked up through the canopy. High above the aircraft, a tiny spark was moving against the stars. It was moving too fast to be a missile. It was moving too fast to be anything human. 2:25 in the morning. The B-1B continued its slow, banking turn toward the south. Thorne was flying by the seat of his pants, feeling the weight of the plane through the mechanical linkages. Suddenly, the cockpit was flooded with light. It was not the violet glow of the Gorgon system. It was a pure, neutral white. It did not come from the instruments. It seemed to come from the air itself. Every screen in the cockpit flickered to life. They did not show the flight data. They did not show the radar map. Every monitor, from the pilot's primary display to the navigator's terminal, displayed a single line of text. The characters were not English. They were not Farsi. They were a series of geometric symbols that shifted and pulsed with a slow, rhythmic light. "Major," Jenkins said. Her voice was barely audible. "My tablet is doing it too." "What is it?" Thorne asked. "It is a message. I cannot read it, but I can feel it. 2:25 in the morning in 30 seconds. The Bandar Abbas bunker." Captain Rezai was staring at the same symbols on his primary command screen. The entire Iranian air defense net had been hijacked. Reports were coming in from stations as far away as Tehran. Every screen in the country that was connected to a military frequency was showing the same geometric pattern. The operator looked at Rezai. "Captain, the missile has reached the edge of the atmosphere, 100 kilometers. It has stopped." "Stopped," Rezai repeated. "Nothing stops at that altitude. It should be falling." "It is stationary," the operator said. "And, Captain, it is not alone. My long-range sensors are waking up. There are hundreds of them, all across the Gulf, all across the world. Objects, sitting at the edge of space." The symbols on the screens changed. They shifted into a new pattern. This time, the meaning was clear. It was not a language. It was a map. It was a map of the Earth, seen from above. And on that map, every nuclear silo, every carrier strike group, and every air defense battery was highlighted in a pulsing, angry red. The message was not a greeting. It was a demonstration. 2:26 in the morning. The white light in the B-1B cockpit faded. The instruments returned to their normal displays. The engines hummed. The Gorgon system was dead, its hardware fried beyond repair. Thorne looked at the coast. The Iranian radar was no longer painting them. The air was silent. The crisis had been averted, but a new reality had taken its place. "Jenkins," Thorne said, "get us home. Right now." "Sir," Jenkins replied. "Where is the missile?" Thorne looked up. The spark was gone. "The sky is empty and black." "It didn't go up to hit something," Thorne said. "It was taken." 2:26 in the morning. The Persian Gulf. The cockpit of the B-1B Lancer was silent except for the steady, mechanical breathing of the crew. The violet light of the Gorgon system had vanished. In its place was the standard, comforting glow of the flight instruments. The jet was flying straight and level at 20,000 feet. Major Thorne felt the weight of the last 6 minutes pressing into his chest. "Jenkins, status of the avionics," Thorne said. Captain Jenkins was resetting her station. The symbols that had occupied her screen only moments ago were gone. "Systems are back to baseline, Major. The flight computer is healthy. Navigation is active. But the Gorgon suite is a total loss. The internal temperature sensor in the processor housing is reading 600 degrees. The hardware has literally melted." Thorne looked at his primary display. The Iranian coast was still there, but the red icons of the missile batteries had turned amber. They were no longer pulsing. They were in a passive search mode. "What about that map?" Thorne asked. "The one with the red dots." "I am checking the recorder," Jenkins said. Her voice was thin. "Major, there is no record of it. The flight data recorder shows a power surge and a 30-second gap in the video feed. According to the black box, those symbols never happened." 2:28 in the morning. The Bandar Abbas air defense sector. Captain Rezai stood in the center of the dark bunker. The air was cooling, but the smell of ozone remained. His technicians were working with flashlights, swapping out fried circuit boards and restarting the primary servers. The screens were flickering back to life, one by one. The fire control operator looked up. "Captain, I have the regional command center on the secure line. They are demanding a report on the missile launch." Rezai took a deep breath. He looked at the main tactical screen. The American bomber was moving away from the coast. It was no longer a flickering ghost. It was a clear, identifiable B-1B signature. It was not acting like a threat. "Tell them the intercept failed," Rezai said. "Tell them the target utilized an experimental electronic countermeasure that caused a guidance malfunction. Tell them the missile self-destructed over the water." "But, Captain, the operator whispered. The map. The red dots on our hidden silos. Do we report that? Rizai looked at the empty screen where the geometric symbols had been. He remembered the feeling of that light. It had not felt like a weapon. It had felt like a reprimand. No, Rizai said. We report only the tactical facts. If we tell them the sky spoke to us, they will put us in a cell. For now, the intruder is leaving. That is all that matters. 2:30 in the morning, high above the Earth, the Sayed-3 missile was no longer a weapon of war. It was a piece of debris drifting at the very edge of the exosphere, 110 kilometers above the surface. Its rocket motor had burned out. Its guidance computer was dead. But it was not falling. In the classified Space Operations Center in Colorado, a group of analysts sat in stunned silence. They were looking at a high-resolution satellite feed of the Persian Gulf. They had seen the launch. They had seen the impossible turn. And they had seen the missile reach the edge of space. Sir, a young analyst said, pointing at a thermal spike on the monitor. Look at the telemetry from the orbital sensor. The missile did not just stop. A senior colonel leaned in. What are we looking at? There was a distortion in the local gravity field. For 3 milliseconds, the analyst explained. The missile was moving at Mach 4. Then, its velocity dropped to 0 instantly. There was no explosion, no debris. It was just caught. The colonel watched the screen. A tiny, silver shape appeared. For a fraction of a second near the missile. It was not a satellite. It was not a craft. It was a ripple in the light. Then, both the ripple and the missile vanished from the radar. Did it deorbit? The colonel asked. No, sir. It is gone. It is completely off the sensors. Back in the cockpit of Reaper 1-1, Major Thorne turned the aircraft toward the refueling track over the Arabian Sea. The mission was over. The prototype was destroyed. The secret was safe. But as he looked up at the stars, they no longer felt like distant points of light. They felt like eyes. The sky was quiet again, but the silence felt different. It was the silence of a room where someone is watching from the corner. 2:31 in the morning. The dark expanse of the Arabian Sea. The B-1B Lancer was moving toward a prearranged coordinate to meet a KC-135 tanker. The adrenaline that had fueled the crew for the last 15 minutes was beginning to recede. It was replaced by a cold, heavy exhaustion. Major Thorne looked out the side window at the faint glow of the stars. The sky looked exactly as it had an hour ago. But for the 4 people inside the bomber, the universe had changed its shape. Reaper 1-1. This is Steel Track, a calm voice said over the radio. We have you on secondary radar. You are 3 minutes from the contact point. Your transponder is still intermittent. Confirm your status. Thorne keyed the mic. Steel Track. We had a major electrical surge in the mission equipment. We are flying on backup avionics. We are bingo on fuel. Requesting immediate hookup. Copy that, Reaper. We see you. The boom is down. Welcome to the party. The refueling was a routine procedure. It was a mechanical ballet performed at 400 miles per hour in total darkness. Thorne focused on the taillights of the tanker. He eased the nose of the Lancer into the slipstream. He did not think about the missile. He did not think about the geometric symbols. He focused on the steady hands required to keep a 100-ton aircraft inches away from a flying fuel pipe. 2:38 in the morning. Inside the rear station of the Lancer, Captain Jenkins was using a small flashlight to inspect the Project Gorgon hardware rack. The smell of burnt copper and melted silicone was overwhelming. The heavy steel casing of the processor was warped. It looked as if it had been heated from the inside by a microwave. She reached out a gloved hand and touched the surface. It was still radiating heat. Major, Jenkins said over the intercom, I am looking at the Gorgon core. The physical damage it is impossible. The circuit boards haven't just melted, they have been fused into a single block of glass. The energy required to do this should have blown the tail off the airplane. Was it the missile? Thorne asked. No, Jenkins replied. The missile was the target of the energy. This damage came from the signal we received. The message did not just appear on our screens. It was carved into the hardware. 2:42 in the morning. Foreign Defense Headquarters facility. In a windowless room deep underground, 3 high-ranking generals sat around a mahogany table. They were looking at a printed transcript of the radio traffic from a coastal military facility. They were also looking at a grainy photograph of a radar screen. Captain Rezai had been correct. The official report stated that a mechanical failure had occurred, but the generals were not looking at the official report. They were looking at the internal logs of the national power grid. Every transformer within 50 miles of the coast tripped at the exact second of the intercept, the senior general said. The surge did not come from our lines. It came from the atmosphere, and we have reports from the civilian telecommunications sector. Every mobile phone in the province displayed a series of symbols for exactly 30 seconds. What kind of symbols? The second general asked. Mathematics, the first replied. Coordinate geometry, a map of our primary defense nodes. Someone showed us that they know exactly where our heart is, and they showed us they can stop our pulse whenever they choose. The Americans, the third general suggested. The senior general shook his head. If the Americans had this technology, they would not be flying 30-year-old bombers off our coast. They would not need to hide. This was not a weapon. This was a shutter. Someone just closed the blinds on us. 2:45 in the morning. The B-1B finished its refueling. Thorne backed the aircraft away from the tanker. He watched the KC-135 disappear into the darkness. But as Thorne turned the aircraft toward the distant horizon of the base in Qatar, he felt a strange sense of relief. For a few seconds, the world had been on the brink of a fire that would have consumed millions. And something had stepped in. Something had reached out and caught the arrow before it could strike. Jenkins, Thorne said, when we land, we are going to be debriefed by a lot of people in suits. What are we going to tell them? There was a long pause. Thorne heard the sound of Jenkins closing her flight bag. We tell them the system failed, she said. We tell them the truth is in the wreckage, and we pray they never try to build another one. The Lancer flew on. Below them, the world continued to sleep, unaware of how close it had come to waking up in a different age. 4:15 in the morning. Al Udeid Air Base, Qatar. The wheels of the B-1B Lancer chirped as they made contact with the runway. Major Thorne deployed the spoilers and felt the massive aircraft settle onto the concrete. He taxied the bomber toward a remote, high-security hangar far from the standard maintenance bays. As the engines began their long, metallic cooling whine, a fleet of black suburban SUVs surrounded the aircraft. Thorne and Jenkins descended the ladder. They were met not by ground crews, but by men in suits and high-ranking officers with grim expressions. They were separated immediately. The debriefing would last for the next 18 hours, 3 days later. The Pentagon, Washington District of Columbia. A windowless conference room in the basement of the E-Ring was filled with the smell of stale coffee and electronic heat. On the table sat a single, heavy Pelican case. Inside was the remains of the Project Gorgon processor. A civilian scientist from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency looked at the charred components through a magnifying lens. He looked up at a 4-star general. It is not a malfunction, General, the scientist said. We have finished the molecular analysis of the silicon wafers. The architecture of the chip has been physically altered. It has been rewritten at the atomic level. It is no longer a jammer. It is a recording device. A recording of what? The general asked. Of us, the scientist replied. The data we recovered from the buffer is not military code. It is a biological signature. It is a map of human intent. Whoever touched this system was not interested in our radar. They were looking at our decision-making process. They were measuring how close we were willing to go to the edge. Across the world, in a similar room in Tehran, the Iranian High Command reached a similar conclusion. The missile battery had been dismantled and moved to an underground facility. The official story remained a tactical error. But the silence between the two nations was different now. It was a shared silence. Both sides had seen the map of their own vulnerabilities. Both sides had felt the same hand catch, the arrow. The strategic assessment was classified at the highest level of secrecy. The conclusion was simple and terrifying. The test of the Secresis II Gorgon system had succeeded in one way. It had proven that stealth was no longer a matter of physics. It was a matter of permission. Modern warfare had reached a ceiling. The most advanced weapons on the planet had been neutralized by a force that did not use fire or steel. It used logic. It used light. And it had done so with a precision that made the world's superpowers look like children playing with matches in a cathedral. In a quiet suburb in Virginia, Major Elias Thorne sat on his back porch. He watched the sun rise over the trees. He thought about the white light in the cockpit. He thought about the symbols that had felt like a reprimand. He knew that the project would be buried. The military would try to reverse engineer the damage. They would try to build a better shield. They would try to find a way to fight the shadow. But Thorne knew they would fail. You cannot fight something that can turn your own weapon back toward your heart. You can only choose not to fire. The morning was clear and blue. For the first time in his career, Thorne did not look at the sky as a battlefield. He looked at it as a 2022 frontier, one that was already occupied, and one that was watching, waiting to see if humanity could learn the difference between power and restraint.